I want to welcome you all to the fourth installment of the 2011-2012 NYU Reynolds Social Entrepreneurship in the 21st Century Speaker Series. My name is Gabriel Brodbar. I'm the director of the NYU Reynolds Program. And I'm also someone who's been truly, truly inspired by tonight's speaker, Mr. Jeffrey Hollender. I first met Jeff, I guess about a year ago when I saw him speak at the UN conference on social entrepreneurship. And I was really blown away by his thinking, his integrity, and especially his courage in sharing some very smart, very necessary, and very unpopular ideas. Jeff, of course, is well known as the founder of Seventh Generation. It's a company he founded a little over 20 years ago, and it has grown into America's leading brand of green home and personal care products. Since that founding and since his tenure as Seventh Generation's Chief Inspired Protagonist, did I get that right? Which is the title he assumed after his role as CEO, Jeff has probably spent more time than anybody thinking about, evangelizing, and really demonstrating how businesses can take the lead in building a better future. And when Jeff talks about businesses building a better future, he really, really means it. He's not talking about businesses simply being less bad. He's not talking about businesses simply reducing their carbon emissions or having better intentions or CSR. You wouldn't necessarily know it by looking at him. You know, he's really clean cut and he smells really nice, but he is a genuine rebel. And he's really advocating for a seismic shift in the way businesses think about themselves and, more importantly, in how they behave. He refers to this as the responsibility revolution. And it's a world where business has been completely redefined, where value-driven leaders truly integrate social and environmental concerns into their profit motives. And what results from this is not only a more sustainable and equitable planet, but lo and behold, also more resilient business models. He takes this revolution very, very seriously, and more than anybody that I've come across in this space, really puts his money where his mouth is. What corporate leader would, as Jeff has done time and time again, publicly list all the things that are wrong with the products that his company produces? At last year's Fast Company conference, in front of a very influential audience of hundreds and perhaps thousands on the internet, Jeff said about Seventh Generation, quote, "All of our products create CO2 emissions, they produce garbage, and they use natural resources. They are better than the competition, but they are simply not good products." I think it's that kind of ruthless transparency, which is how one author put it, that really separates Jeff from the many people that are thinking about this stuff or really simply pretending to engage in true responsible corporate behavior. I think another thing that separates him is the clarity with which he explains how we got into this mess in the first place, and the 10-point plan that he provides as a roadmap to help us bring business and the economy and society from where it is to where it desperately, desperately needs to get to. I know we're going to hear a lot of insightful and a lot of provocative things tonight, so please join me in warmly welcoming Mr. Jeffrey Hollender.
Well, that is quite an introduction. Thank you very much. I have a lot to live up to right now. Well, thank you all for coming out this evening. It's really a privilege to get to speak to you, and I hope I can live up to my history here. I'm going to probably talk for 30 or 40 minutes, and then we'll have time for questions. So please, as I speak, be prepared to challenge me after I speak. I'm going to speak about four things. My perspective about the situation we're in, a 5-minute overview of the system of corporate influence that has shaped our economic and social landscape over the last 40 years. Successes and failures when it comes to corporate responsibility, and then end by speaking about some of the most promising solutions that I see on the horizon. I want to just tell you a little bit more about my own history. I mean, I am and have spent my entire life starting and running businesses. 3 primarily. The last company before Seventh Generation was a publishing company that I sold to Warner Communications when I was about 29 years old. Seventh Generation, which was started in 1988, and was really and has been quite a financial success. One of the things that I found is that if you want people to pay attention to you and you're going to be radical in your thinking, it helps to also be very successful financially, because people seem to be a lot more interested if you're growing and making money than if you're not growing and losing money. And I've tried it both ways. So Seventh Generation is really about, it's not like I woke up one morning and said, I want to sell toilet paper or I want to sell laundry detergent. I had no desire, no interest in selling any of the specific products that we sell. I was really primarily interested in trying to show that business could play a different role in society, and not academically, but practically show that. And we did that by focusing on things like the critical nature of employee ownership, by focusing on salary caps for senior management to prove that you can be financially successful and have limited executive compensation at the same time. And again, that's something that we felt very strongly that we had to prove. And as you mentioned in the introduction, radical transparency was absolutely foundational. Businesses don't believe that they can be honest and tell the truth and be successful, and we wanted to show that that was not the case. In addition to starting and running these 3 businesses, and particularly more recently, I've had a fascinating experience of, on the one hand, I am the chair of the board of Greenpeace and serve on a lot of nonprofit boards like Verite that are progressive organizations, while I interact with large companies like Walmart or SC Johnson. And I often feel that I live in a world of sort of irreconcilable differences. And it is in many ways the most exciting place to be. If you can stand in the middle between the 2 greatest extremes, polar opposites, and innovate to come up with solutions that work for both, that is a very challenging but also very exciting thing to do. And I should mention that about 2 years ago, I co-founded an organization called the American Sustainable Business Council. That organization now has 110,000 business members, mostly small and medium-sized companies who are lobbying in Washington for things like having CO2 regulated, ensuring that the healthcare policy that was passed is not taken apart and ruined, pushing for higher tax rates for wealthy people, pushing for higher minimum wages for low-income people. So it is a very, very, very progressive business group, and what's astounding is that it has 110,000 members who are all aligned around those issues. So let me start with just a little bit, and I think I'll go through this quickly because I think it's no surprise to most of you. Edelman does an annual benchmarking survey about Americans' attitudes towards business, and not surprisingly, 6 in 10 people said that business did not meet their expectations, and 7 in 10 have higher expectations in the coming year. 82% of the American public assigned business a grade of C or lower, and 42% gave American business a D or an F. So there is no question. I used to say to my friends in the labor movement that the labor movement is becoming a bad brand. Business today is also in jeopardy of becoming a bad brand. And that's something that we don't want to see happen. One of the reasons why I think business is viewed in such a negative light is that we live at a time where the profits to American companies have never been higher. They're the highest they've been in 60 years of being tracked. And yet the taxes that business pay has never been lower. So what happens when you have that paradigm? When business makes more money and they pay less taxes, what role do they continue to play in society for our social good? We also live in a society where 1% of the population owns 50% of the wealth. And again, that is largely driven by the role that business has played in generating policies that allow that wealth to happen. And one of the things, that I look at with some remiss, which is as hard as I tried to foster employee ownership at seventh generation, one of the things that you realize is that because of the way money flows into particularly successful businesses, businesses with very strong social values, if they take money from the wrong people, end up creating wealth and concentrating wealth, even as they have a mission in politics that might be very different. I really worry about the social inequity that comes from this concentration in wealth. In America, worse than Egypt, worse than Tunisia, worse than Yemen, we have greater social and financial inequality in this country. 1 out of every 7 Americans relies on food stamps, and we have millions and millions of children that are homeless, that live in cars, that live in motels, that live in underpasses. And if nothing else makes you wonder about what's not working in our society, a society that allows its children to go hungry and homeless, to me, is a sign that there really is a deep erosion of values. How has this happened? And I'm going to give you a very, very simplistic overview about how this happened over the last 30 to 40 years. But business has had a very, very heavy hand in rewriting the rules of the game. And the rules are really complicated because there's legal rules, there's accounting rules, there's all kinds of government programs, and business has the money and the resources to pay incredibly careful attention to the hundreds of thousands of rules that govern our society, but more importantly, our economy. And we know one of the biggest examples that we've seen is with General Electric. General Electric with 1,000 tax accountants working to rewrite the rules that govern the way companies pay taxes, creates a system where GE pays no taxes and in fact gets a multi-billion-dollar refund. And while I understand, because I have challenged and accosted some people at GE about that, their answer is, we didn't do anything that's illegal. And that's true. But I worry about a society for which the rule of law is the only guiding principle around what we do. And we created a system that allows business to rewrite the rules of the game. And unfortunately, at least I can say for my generation, we were sort of asleep at the wheel while that was happening. I remember back to the 60s during the Vietnam War, and there was an incredible mood of activism and responsibility, which waned after that. And during that period, as you now review the history, we see that many structural, systemic things happened. And it's not just a question of our values. It is also a question of a system that has been designed to do exactly what it does. We face this at seventh generation. I mean, you know, we face the reality that the government subsidized the virgin timber industry with $1 billion a year. And people wonder why tissue paper made out of recycled fiber costs more money. And it is in part because the government brings down the cost of virgin fiber. Now, it doesn't matter that it's bad to cut down trees because of global climate change. It doesn't matter that recycled fiber is better because it uses less water and it uses less energy. Our government knows all the reasons why recycled products are better than virgin products, but nevertheless, at the same time, we have a system that financially incentivizes the wrong kind of behavior. We have companies today like Unilever and Johnson & Johnson who have proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that $1 invested in wellness saves $4 to $6 in healthcare costs. And yet we have a nation where we spend almost all of our money treating people once they're sick and virtually no money preventing them from getting sick. It's unfortunately bad for business because our healthcare costs are so high that we're not competitive in the global marketplace. But we still live in a system where even though we know that it is inefficient financially to let people get sick and then to invest in trying to make them better, we still do that. Some of these challenges are personal, and I try to remember that in a way, almost everything that I find wrong in the world stares me in the face when I look in the mirror. And I have to come to terms with the fact that many of the things that I don't like about society are part of who I am. I look at the way I dress and the clothes that I wear and the things that I like to do, and I realize that we have to be very, very careful about pointing our fingers at who we think is the enemy. Because sometimes the enemy can be us. And it is challenging to make things black and white and to say, well, okay, these people are bad, these people are good. Unfortunately, it's much more complicated, and I have to do battle with the good and bad parts of myself almost on a daily basis. What worries me about all this is that despite the efforts of 2 million NGOs all over the world, and despite the good intentions of many, many more millions of people, I think that the trajectory we are on is not a good one. And that trajectory, whether you look at climate change or whether you look at fresh water or whether you look at the elimination of fish in the sea, things are not getting better. And as you said in your introduction, we are too focused on being less bad. And we have fundamentally confused less bad with good. And I'm gonna take a moment to ask all of you to think, and I'm going to ask you if you studied systems thinking or you understand what it is to look at something from a holistic perspective. I'm talking about, you could say, net good. I'm not talking about one aspect of good. I'm talking about a product that is, when you add it all up, is more good than bad. So if you think about a product that you buy or you want to buy that you would consider good, what comes to mind? Sorry? Patagonia. Okay. Now, Patagonia will even tell you that their products are less bad. When you look at the chemicals that go into them and the transportation and everything else, I love Patagonia and I own a lot of Patagonia stuff, but recently they did a deal with eBay where you can exchange and buy used Patagonia clothing. Well, when you're buying used Patagonia clothing, you're coming better to good. But in spite of all the wonderful things they do, they will tell you that they leave the world a worse place than it was before. Another example. Yes?
Education.
So, smart answer, because services tend to have a much lower footprint than products. So, generally speaking, we need a lot more education and a lot less stuff. So that is, you know, it's one of the interesting ways in which we can grow our economy, because things like education, which we need much, much, much more of, don't have the impact on society that the stuff that we accumulate does. But I want to stick with products, and I want to see if someone can come up with a product that is good. Yes? Is that, no, that's, I'm taking that as a joke. Okay, okay. Well, if has anyone seen the play at the Public Theater? Yes, I recommend it highly. Yes? Biomass briquettes. And where are they made? In Africa. So we're using them in the United States, or we're using them in Africa? Okay. And what happens to the smoke?
The smoke? Well, it's not as bad as the coal smoke, but it is actually used in Mexico, in African families, and actually
Yep. So that has a lot of good attributes. I'm not sure I would say it's all good. I would certainly say it's pretty good. But the point that I'm trying to make is that it's hard to think of stuff that's good. And most of the stuff that we like, whether it's Patagonia or Seventh Generation or Stonyfield or anything else, is really less bad. And fundamentally, to solve the challenges that we face in our society, we have to start to think differently. We have to start to be able to think about and design products that are good rather than less bad. And unfortunately, what we do today is we spend huge amounts of energy and reward, recognize, and praise efforts that are all about being less bad. And to a certain extent, we don't even know how to think about what is required to make an all-good product. So, more on that later. Just a little note about corporate responsibility, and you know, I have been in many ways a huge advocate for corporate responsibility for a couple of decades, and I've written books about it. And yet, over the past couple of years, I've come to the conclusion that while we have made good progress, we have made nowhere near enough progress. Too little, too late, too much incremental change and not enough revolutionary change, too much greenwashing, too much cause-related marketing. And hugely important is the fundamental lack of standards. So we do live in a world, I mean, let's say I'm going to anoint you all as the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. We would be lucky to have so many women as the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, but leaving that aside, if I asked you if you were running a sustainable, responsible business, how many of the 500 hands would go up? 500. They'll all tell you that they're running sustainable, responsible businesses because there's no standards that one has to meet. And that really is a challenge. It is really a challenge that we don't have a definition for what responsible is. And now there's efforts like B Corporation that are definitely moving in the right direction. But part of the challenge is that there are no public companies that are B corporations because of what it requires to be a B corporation. And thus, B corporations are really limited to the private sector. So I want to talk lastly about some positive solutions because I do run the risk of depressing everybody by talking about what's wrong with the world. And if it wasn't for all these positive things, you know, I would wake up, I wouldn't want to get out of bed. And I should say overall, I just was doing an interview, and the interview was pressing me to say where it was that I see the most positive things happening. And I would say overall it tends to be on a local community basis. You know, I spent most of my life wanting to change the world and do the big stuff and make all kinds of big things happen, and I'm really beginning to realize that there is far more potential for really important systemic groundbreaking change often when you focus on your own community. And the first example I want to give of that, how many people are familiar with the Evergreen Project in Cleveland? So here is one of the most exciting things that is happening from a business perspective, and from a business perspective that is about really good stuff. And this project that I'm going to describe to you is a project that I've been involved with that we're now trying to replicate in the Bronx and other parts of the country. But the idea is use business to employ unemployable people, people that have very few skills, people that have been felons, people that no one else will hire. Start businesses by getting anchor institutions, hospitals, universities, arts institutions. Now, these institutions buy billions and billions and billions of dollars of stuff. Most of that purchasing is exported out of their community. Well, if they turn around and use their purchasing power to start businesses, when a hospital says, we'll give our laundry to a local, green, cooperatively owned laundry that is located in the poorest neighborhood of our city, you can start the business because you have a committed stream of revenue with a huge institution behind that. And that is this model. It is all about cooperatively owned businesses, because in order to deal with this problem of inequity, you know, one of the things that I would tell you is don't be an employee. It is not a good way to make money. We need to be a nation of owners, not a nation of employees. And so all of these businesses focus exclusively on employee ownership. They can't move. The way they're financed, they have to stay in the community. One of the other problems is that successful businesses pick up and move and leave devastation in their wake. So this business model really comes from a very rich history. Have people heard of the Mondragon cooperatives in Spain? Very, very important thing to know about. Mondragon, that was started in 56, today is a 33 billion euro business made up of 125 companies employing 85,000 people. Every single business is cooperatively owned by the employees. They have their own bank. They finance their own businesses. They have their own insurance company that provides insurance. Salaries are limited top to bottom from 1 to 6. And they virtually have not laid off a single person over the past 50 years. They would rather all reduce their salaries than they would let someone go. They have the most extraordinary commitment to human dignity, to the value that a human being has from doing work that is important to them, something that is almost unrecognizable in this country. I mean, in this country, we look at human beings as disposable assets. When a company doesn't meet its quarterly earnings, one of the first things it does is let people go. That's the way we solve our problems. We fire people. And Mondragon has proven over 50 years that there is another way to run business. And it's a wonderful, wonderful example. And it really is an inspiration to a lot of the work that I'm doing. We have an incredibly rich tradition in this country, although it's very disorganized. We have co-ops, we have ESOPs, we have credit unions and community loan funds, and we haven't recognized them collectively, and they have not organized themselves into the potential force in our economy that they can be. And that is a huge, huge opportunity. So the good news is, in order to solve the problems we face, we don't need new tools, we don't need new technology. We really know all of what we need to know to do it. The challenge is, A, we have to start working together. I mean, having spent a lot of time in the nonprofit sector, it amazes me that nonprofits are often more comfortable competing with each other than they are collaborating. And you think, well, that's something that for-profit businesses do. Nope. Nonprofits have learned all of those bad habits. If we can see, and one of the things that really is so exciting about the American Sustainable Business Council, and the reason that it has grown as successfully as it has, is that all these businesses realize that while one of them might be more concerned about climate change, and someone else might be more concerned about healthcare, and someone else might be more concerned about the way corporations are taxed, if they don't support each other and stick together, they won't accomplish anything. And it is really, in many ways, inspirational to where we need to go. We need to spend much more time focused on what brings us together, what we agree on, than what we disagree on. And as a progressive and a liberal, we love to fight about the most minuscule differences in our perspective. And it's really hard to say, you know what, those little differences really don't matter. And the longer we spend talking about those little differences, the worse things we'll get, and the less likely we are to come together to solve the problems that we really need to deal with. So, I'm running a little long, so I'm going to give you a very quick rundown on my now, I couldn't keep it to 10. I've had to add an 11th point to some very specific things that I think will help get us on the right track. Number one, we have to end, and if you're interested in this, you don't have to write these things down. On my website, jeffreyhollender.com, and in my blog, you can find all this stuff and just cut and paste it, and it'll save you a lot of time. But anyway, we need to end all corporate subsidies, categorically. We cannot give $1 billion a month to companies like Exxon, the most profitable company in the world. So that is critical. We've taken an amazing positive step eliminating the ethanol subsidies, but we have a long, long way to go. We need a corporate flat tax. We can't have a country where we can invest in infrastructure and education and in our future when we have our biggest companies paying virtually no taxes. It's just not okay. It's not fair. If you're a small business, how can you compete with a company that doesn't pay any taxes? They have a huge financial value over you. It's absolutely not fair. We need, at a minimum, a $10 billion fund to invest in social innovation and worker-owned companies. That should start about 40,000 businesses. These small businesses, if you read the research that the Kaufman Foundation produces, are where jobs are being created, and yet there is nowhere near enough capital to help all the entrepreneurs that have wonderfully bright ideas. I think, and this is controversial, that we need to dramatically reduce payroll taxes. 70% of Americans pay more money in payroll taxes than they do in income taxes. It is the biggest tax on the most people in America, and it is not what we should be doing. We need a progressive consumption tax. We should tax the things we want less of rather than the things we want more of. We want more employment. So we shouldn't tax employment the way we do. We need to have less stuff, so therefore we should tax that. Along with taxation, and taxation is incredibly boring but an incredibly important thing to focus on, we should not let people like me get a tax deduction on our second home. People that have second homes don't need tax deductions. We should not let companies take tax deductions when they pay CEOs millions and millions of dollars. We need to cap the deductibility on executive compensation at $500,000 or less. We need to dramatically reduce our defense budget by at least 25%. And this has become an almost taboo subject. My good friend Ben Cohn talked about it for 10 years till he was blue in the face and couldn't get much traction. But it is not building the kind of future we need in our country. Those funds need to be redeployed to things like infrastructure and education. And we really need, there's a lot of controversy about this. I don't know whether people read the Economist's cover story last week on state capitalism. Anybody read that? I thought it was a fascinating story. I mean, I believe that we need an economic strategy in this country. An economic strategy that is not driven by our most powerful and wealthy corporations, but an economic strategy that really will build the kind of future we want. I see that happening in China. China is dominating the world when it comes to alternative energy technology. They invest more in 1 month in alternative energy than we do in an entire year. Here we have one of the most important technological developments for our future, alternative energy, and China's spending 12 times what the US is spending. Same thing is true when it comes to water purification and desalination. China is spending way more than 10 or 12 times what we are. They will dominate the world with the best technology to desalinate and purify water. Now you think about energy, you think about water, they are leading on the most important things that it takes to have a healthy society. Now, people will find it controversial to have government developing a strategy for our future, but I don't know who else is going to do that. And I think we need a strategy, and that strategy has to flow from the businesses we create down to the education system we have. I think, roughly speaking, if we produce 40,000 engineers, which we need a lot of, India produces 400,000 and China produces 4 million. How are we going to have the kind of future we want when we don't make the right investment in education? Tax on carbon, sorry for that. Again, if you're in Northern Europe, you cannot be a public company if 40% of the women, if you don't have 40% women board members. We know statistically, Fortune magazine will tell you, you want to have a more profitable, successful company, one of the easiest things to do is have more women on your board. It's statistically true. It's always been statistically true. Yet in America, we don't do it. And we should not allow businesses to be run by men. It's a big part of the mess that we've had. We need to require radical transparency. And the last thing that I'll say, because I'm way over my time, is that Gar Alperovitz, do people know Gar Alperovitz? He just republished his book, America Beyond Capitalism, one of the most brilliant books I've read. He is a real mentor to me. And one of the things he talks about is that we have created a democratic society in a way that doesn't allow people to participate in our democracy. If you've got to work 2 or 3 jobs, you don't have time to participate in your community. If you're spending all your time looking for a job, you don't have time to participate in your community. And he feels that in many respects, we have this theoretical democracy that doesn't actually function as a democracy because we don't allow individuals the time to participate. We allow businesses, I mean, you've seen Newt with $10 million of money dumped into his campaign by 2 individuals. How does it feel, and what is the motivation for you as a citizen to go cast your vote when you know the person sitting somewhere else in the country can buy tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of votes with their money? Citizens United, one of the worst decisions that the Supreme Court made in as long as I can remember, legally allows corporations special status to dump their money into the political system and corrupt it in a way that disincentivizes us as citizens to do that. So I didn't mean to regress into a negative paradigm again. I'm sorry. I fight that as much as I can. But now we have time for questions. There's no ground rule, except that there's no question you cannot ask me. The only question I haven't been willing to answer is when I don't know the answer. I do not make up the answer. But please feel free to ask anything you would like me to ask. There are some people somewhere with microphones. So I guess raise your hand so they can bring the microphone over to you and ask away.
Hey, I just wanted to ask, so you were talking earlier about progressive taxing system and taxing things we want as opposed to things we need and less tax on jobs. But also commenting earlier about wanting to follow more than the rule of the law, what's better off. So do you, as a higher income individual, pay more than your required taxes?
Well, we give away money. We don't pay more than our required taxes. But,
Okay.
If you think about the system of tithing, which says that you should give away at least 10% of what you make, we redirect our income by giving it away. I'm not sure the benefit of paying more money in taxes, but I would rather have the discretion to direct that additional money where I want it to go rather than letting the government do that. Are we going back and forth? What's the system? So I know where to look. Okay, I guess we're staying over here for the moment.
Okay, so did you take the deduction on your second home?
Yeah, I did. Maybe I shouldn't. I don't know. That would create a lot of tension with my wife. But
But really, my main question is about, you talk about good. It always comes up in class, what is good? That's very subjective. Lots of people out there that do not agree with me on what good is for everybody or an individual or whatever. So the $64,000 question or whatever is always how do you put a universal value on something that is so subjective. And so then how do we go out and market this goodness?
yeah. Yeah, it's certainly to create the guidelines around what is good and what is not good is challenging. I mean, I think there's a lot that we can agree on. It's not good to have children go to bed hungry. It's not good to have children live homeless. It's not good to use to destroy our natural resources. I mean, the challenge is, I think that there's a lot that is relatively universal that we can agree on that we haven't found the way to enact into the way we function. I know that there's lots and lots of places where people may disagree about what is good and what is bad. And certainly, in this political environment, you're really seeing some, what I would consider pretty scary versions of what is good. From a libertarian perspective, let everybody do what they want to do. There's a huge movement to get rid of government regulations because that's bad for business and government shouldn't tell people what to do. But, if we didn't have those rules and regulations, it wouldn't be safe to drive your car down the street. It wouldn't be safe to breathe the air that we have. So I think that the issue of defining what good is critical, and we need to spend time doing that. But I think that there's a lot of work we can do where there's relatively widespread agreement. I think The challenge is more, how do you have the effect that you want to have? So what path do you take to prevent children from being homeless and from feeding them? You know, and that there's a lot of disagreement on. But I think it's fair to say that my sense of good is not going to be your sense of good, and that's a pretty challenging territory. Yes.
I'm sort of fascinated by seventh generation. I use the products. I'm very interested in daily routines and how daily routines kind of affect the environment. And I'm just curious, like, given all of the work you've done and all the products you've helped to make and all the studies and things you've read, like, sort of at this point, what you kind of see as a daily routine that is sort of beneficial for the environment, whether it's in, like, what clothes you choose or what home products you use, and then also, like, what kind of steps you see that maybe things that don't exist yet that you think might be helpful.
Sure. So, you know, there's a territory that is more easy to define. I mean, 50% of our impact on the environment comes from our diet and our transportation. So while it's important to choose the right dish detergent and the right toothpaste, if you're really concerned about making a difference, focus on transportation and diet, because that has an outsized impact on the planet. You know, I also think that different people will focus on doing different things, and I don't ever want to say, you know, the most important thing you can do is wear I mean, this is a Patagonia organic shirt, and I'm not going to tell everyone, well, go buy a Patagonia organic shirt. I mean, first of all, the best thing you can do is not buy a new shirt to begin with. But I would say focus on those two things. I mean, I can tell you, of all the products that Seventh Generation created, the single product that I am the most proud of is our organic cotton tampons. Because from a systemic perspective, we dealt with the agricultural impacts of growing things that are organic, and combined that with the incredibly important health aspects of not putting a product inside your body that has dioxin and pesticide residue. And so that product touched on more aspects of good than most of the products that we sold.
So if a lot of the proposed solutions that we hear are often dealing with symptoms of the existing system, is there any value or real potential to creating a new one? You know, I'm a big buck Mr. Fuller fan, and I don't remember exactly if he said, if you don't like the existing system, create a new one that makes it obsolete. And so if there is value to creating a system, the area I struggle with is, can we create one of where we ought to be or where we want to go? Or do we need to create one that can meet us where we are and act as a vehicle?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think that in many respects, practically speaking, we almost need to build the new system inside of the old system and hope that the old system won't notice too much. And, you know, in Vermont, where we spend most of our time, that's happening. I mean, Vermont leads the nation in consuming the food that it grows in the state, leads the nation in generating alternative energy, which it consumes, has a hospital that serves 50% of all the food to its patients and its employees that is grown right near the hospital or is local or fair trade. So I think that, and you know, you can discount that and you can say, well, that's a lot of homogeneous white people who, you know, don't bring some of the ethnic challenges that you find in a city like New York. But I still think it's incredibly impressive that you can build that new system inside the old system. You can have the conversations about, you know, we did a great study a decade ago about import substitutions and how much of our money we were exporting out of the state. You know, you bank in a global national bank and you're putting your money in a bank that does not get reinvested in your community. And so there's a huge focus on investing in credit unions and local banks. I mean, we've really, in a sense, and I think in part, it's because the beauty of Vermont is something that people experience in such a visceral way that they're really motivated to protect it. And they're really willing to engage in a conversation about what is required to protect the thing that we love. And I see huge potential in that. I really see that Vermont, in many respects, can be a model for that new system that we need to create. We have a huge CSA agricultural movement, and we have people that now want to create energy CSAs, where people pay in advance for the energy they want, and then they get that over the course of the year. So there's a lot of exciting innovations, and I do see that happening inside the system. I mean, I just don't think in this day and age we can cut ourselves off and create that new solution.
I got a question here.
Yes.
Right in front of you. So if you had a chance to talk to a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, let's say, for example, GE, you mentioned it earlier, what angle would you take to get him on board to kind of turn the corner to help his company change, or even like a mid-sized company that could realistically change in a decade? What angle or what position would you hook them to kind of bring them in?
So there's a couple of ways I think that you have to approach these conversations. The easiest way to have the conversation is to make the business case to them about why they should be more sustainable. And we have a huge lack of people learning in school how to make this business case in an articulate fashion. I mean, it's something that we really need to learn. But what you would say is, you know, today 75% of the average value of American companies is in intangibles, things like reputation and brand. And what you would say is, you would say, well, so you insure your building and you insure your inventory and you insure all of your fixed assets. What are you doing to insure the value of the single biggest asset you have, which is your brand and your reputation? And you can make a pretty compelling argument that by being responsible and sustainable is one of the best ways to protect that asset. It is amazing. I mean, you know, my wife and I have been talking a lot about the Susan Komen Foundation to see how quickly you can blow up a $100 million entity. And we live in a world where we will see more and more companies getting blown up than we ever have before. So you would start by making these business cases, you know, whether it's someone who is making trailers that are filled with formaldehyde, you know, that is causing health risks. You would say, you know, the cost of having to pay a claim out to someone that you've made sick is far greater than what it does. So, you know, unfortunately, that's not going to lead to really transformative change. And the transformative change is more likely to come when the child of the CEO, not me, you know, reads something bad about the company and says, gee, Daddy, is that your company that made all those people sick? Or, gee, Daddy, is that your company that fired all those people? I mean, there really is almost an ethical, moral framework that we have to shift. I mean, the reason all those people can sleep at night is because they live in a very fixed framework. You know, we're in business to do this, we create jobs, we do all these things, and they don't think systemically. They don't think, you know, when all of the people in politics voted for all those ethanol subsidies, you know, they were telling themselves, well, we're making energy out of vegetables, it's a good thing, it's good for farmers. You know, they weren't thinking about all the people in, you know, Mexico that were going to go hungry because they couldn't afford to buy corn because the price, the use of ethanol, which I think got up to about 40% of the corn crop in the United States, made corn so expensive that people weren't eating. And so part of the challenges that we all live in this compartmentalized world. I mean, you find this even in companies. You find that salespeople are fighting with marketing people because they have different motivations. The salespeople want short-term results and more sales, and the marketing people are trying to build a brand over the long term. And if we don't create a common framework that we're working in, and this really is a challenge, we think we're doing the right thing when we're really doing the wrong thing. And we can't discount the system that we talked about. We can't discount a system where the turnover at CEO level for public companies is, 3, 4, 5 years and someone's gone. So why are you going to behave in a way that thinks about the long term when you know you're unlikely to be there? Why are you going to think about the long term when all of your compensation is tied to what you do this year or next year? So those structural things are challenging. But I do, I mean, one of the most inspirational things, you see a guy like Paul Pullman, who's now the CEO of Unilever. And, this is a large multinational corporation. And a year or so ago, he stood up in front of an audience and said, we are going to cut our impact, our negative impact on the planet in half over the next decade. And people said, well, how are you going to do that? And he said, I don't know, but we have to find a way. Otherwise, this will be not a world in which my children will be able to live. He was then asked by some financial analysts, well, isn't that going to be bad for your quarterly earnings? And he said, if you're investing in this company for what's good for the next quarter or the next year, you're investing in the wrong company. So we have leaders of big companies that are beginning to stand up and say those things because they have looked at the data, they've looked at the facts, and they've said, we can't keep going down the road we're going on. And that's reason for hope.
I have a question.
Yes.
I was wondering, so I used to work for a sustainably minded company, a competitor of yours, and one of the issues that we used to have is reconciling the need for transparency and the desire for it to needing to protect our IP and the use of patents so that the larger companies couldn't just overrun our ideas. How do you approach that?
Yeah. Well, if you were competing with us, then I... No. What I'm saying is, our conclusion is that anybody with a fair amount of money could reverse engineer all of the products that we sell. And so the notion that we have to keep something secret is sort of, it sounds good, but our conclusion is it really wasn't true. So, we adopted a policy of complete transparency, even of byproducts that end up in our products, not just the ingredients. So, I mean, I think, for seventh generation at least, it was about the brand, not about the chemistry that was in the bottle. It was really about building, from a marketing perspective, we aimed to create a brand that helped people become who they aspired to be by buying something that was doing and helping them do the good things they wanted to do in the world. We tried to create a brand that was about the kind of relationship you want to be in. I mean, who wants to be in a relationship with someone that won't tell you the whole truth, that thinks they're better than everybody else is, that just likes to talk about themselves, that never cops to the things that, but look, that's what most brands are. Most brands love to talk about how wonderful they are, and who wants to be in a relationship with something or somebody like that? And you know what? But like, business can't get it. Business thinks that if they don't stop, if they're like addicted to puffing themselves up. And I think people, and particularly your generation, is beginning to realize, we don't want that. So I don't know, but when you're selling toilet paper, there's not a lot of IP anyway, but.
Like the female products, those have patents.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say that nothing should be confidential, but it's dangerous. I mean, I think you remember there was a water bottle that got into big trouble by saying, well, we had this confidential seal on the inside of the water bottle, and it turned out that they were really hiding something that was not healthy for people inside. So I mean, there's a place for IP, but the challenge is you have to have that dialogue with your consumers. You have to convince them that you need to keep that confidential, not me, not your competitors. You have to have that dialogue with your consumers so that they understand the validity of keeping something secret. But you know, in the challenges, you know, occasionally that's true, but we pick lots of things that don't need to be secret and make them secret. So.
I have a home in Vermont, and we think Vermont is kind of a dream world when you look at the microcosm. I teach here. I've learned to throw my voice. Don't you think, in all seriousness, that and I think the young man who asked about the CEOs today, if we're not teaching it in our business schools and we're looking at frankly ancient case histories, and as an MBA here at NYU, I adore the school, but we are still teaching people the old business models. We're still teaching them the Milton Friedman, who said the #1 reason a company exists is to increase shareholder value. So when you walk into, the Walmarts and the Targets of the world, do they look at you and kind of throw up a crucifix and go, oh my God, here he is? How do you proselytize? Because I agree with you, and Vermont is heaven. Yeah. I mean, I love coming back here. My husband would stay there.
So I'll tell you the story of my first conversation with Lee Scott, who was the former CEO of Walmart. And first of all, you have to meet them with where they are. I mean, I might not talk to CEOs the way I'm talking to you, but part of the conversation I had with Lee Scott, he was really, really frustrated. There were 2 labor groups that had organized campaigns against Walmart. One of them was Walmart Watch, and I can't remember the name of the other one. And they were telling all the terrible things about Walmart and their labor practices and their environmental practices, and he was really frustrated with that. And I said to him, well, you're the biggest reason why those websites get so much traffic. It is Walmart's refusal to be more transparent so that the only place someone can go to get information about Walmart is the exact people that you don't want people going to see and read their website. And I said, but you're making that happen. Your refusal to be more transparent and more honest and more open and more direct sends everybody to your enemies. He got it. He understood that he was the reason that was building up his foes as quickly as he is. So part of the challenge in having these dialogues is you really have to understand where someone is sitting, and you have to provide them with practical, tangible advice sometimes that helps move them forward. Now, the other challenge about, I mean, teaching people stuff that is not the stuff they need to learn. I mean, that's a big challenge. I mean, there's still lots of courses about the free market, and I don't know where you'd have to go to some planet in the solar system to find a free market. There is no free market, but yet we talk about it and we teach it. And people stand up on TV and talk about, we got to protect the free market. We can't let government intervene in the marketplace, when government has its fingers on everything in the marketplace and everything that's been sold. But, the truth is, if we don't teach these things to the next generation, we will continue to replicate the pattern that we're trying to get rid of. Now, I have plenty of my own patterns that I replicate every day that I try to change, and it's not so easy. But I must say, I mean, I could spend my life going around and talking to business schools. I mean, there's never been more interest in people who are studying business than there is today in these subjects. We just need to move a little more quickly.
I have a question.
Yes.
You mentioned about the Vermont's model, which is very locally based. Everything's very community-based. On the other hand, in the global economy, we're seeing more and more international companies moving their headquarters, organize their organization in such a way to minimize their tax. What's your view on that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we have corporations today that have no allegiance to any country and any place. I mean, I don't think that globalization is going to go away, but it is deeply out of balance. So we have to address that in the way we tax companies. I mean, we allow those companies to not be taxed. We allow those companies to have no responsibility or allegiance. And yet at the same time, I mean, one of the things that impressed me about a company like Intel is that while companies were going to countries around the world that had the lowest regulatory standards to lower their price, Intel would build a factory to the highest standards anywhere in the world wherever they built that factory. There are things like cars that are not going to be made in Vermont. There are plenty of products that need to be made in a more global fashion. But I think that we've totally lost sight of the things that can be made and should be encouraged from a local perspective. Things like food, things like energy. I mean, it's not safe. I mean, you look at what happens with the tsunami that was in Japan. I mean, because these global companies had such long supply chains, those long supply chains that large multinational companies have are going to get wiped out as we see more and more environmental disruption. And it's not going to be good business. And all of the things that we've learned, which is go wherever we can go to get the cheapest thing we can get, is going to prove to be a competitive disadvantage. And companies with shorter supply chains doing things more locally, I think will end up having a competitive advantage in the coming decade. Now, I don't know that, so the other problem is that it's very hard to govern these multinational corporations because they set up their headquarters in whatever place they like the rules, and they don't have to apply to the rules in other places, and I don't think that's okay. I mean, I don't think that any company like GE, for whatever reason, should be allowed to pay no taxes on the revenue they generate. They should pay taxes here, they should pay taxes in all of the countries in which they generate revenue, and yet we allow them not to do that because business is writing the rules. We're not writing the rules, we've let business write those rules. Yes, where's the microphone?
Hi. Are we going to be able to make the changes we need to make before we run into fundamental limits of the biosphere?
So, unfortunately, what I think is going to happen, I don't know if people have read The Great Disruption, which is a pretty good book. I mean, we've set some things in motion, like global climate change, that are going to unfold and have negative impacts. I think the challenge and really the opportunity is to be ready to accentuate, focus on, and build the good stuff when the bad stuff happens. So we will face a bunch of environmental, social, political challenges around the globe. What we have to do now is lay the foundation for the new systems so that as things go bad, we can say, hey, I mean, a great example, do people know the Triodos Bank in the Netherlands? My favorite bank in the world. This is a bank, a multi-billion-dollar bank, that only invests in three things: sustainable agriculture, alternative energy, and microenterprise. This bank, which is now in 7 European countries, has performed better than any bank over the past decade because they haven't invested in the kinds of risky behavior that a lot of American banks have invested in. And they've proven, I mean, Peter Blum, who's the CEO, will tell you that this is the bank that we need to have in the future, and that his financial performance, which doesn't have the kind of volatility that most of our banking systems are now experiencing, is a better business model because it's more resilient and less risky. So what's so important is we need to cultivate those alternative models so that we have them in place to point to and to encourage when things go wrong. But yeah, things will go wrong. I mean, unfortunately, it's hard to see how the path we're on will not lead to some reasonable disruption. And we have to use that disruption to our own advantage. We have to be ready to do it. It's like playing billiards. You know, it's, instead of pool, we have to anticipate the trajectory of things that are happening and then be ready to take the bounce in the right direction. Where's the microphone?
I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more on how your personal development is related to making the world a better place. So how you develop yourself in order. So okay, let me rephrase that. How can you, or how do you suggest that we all work on ourselves as individuals in order to be able to make the change that we seek in the world?
Yeah, that's a great question because it takes a endless commitment to your own growth to not end up standing in the way of the progress that we want to make. And you know, I remember, you know, some of the things that I have done, like 360 reviews. I remember that there was something wonderful in allowing every employee in the company to weigh in on what I was doing right and what I was doing wrong. And it was humbling to have to listen to that, which a lot of CEOs don't do. And it also ensured that I would always be in and out of therapy for the rest of my life. But being committed to your own growth, being committed, you know, I mean, for example, the fact that I meditate every day is a critical part of my leadership. To realize that you know, for those 20 minutes, the stillness and the ability to stop is critical. I mean, things, and many of these things we've built into the seventh generation business. One of the things that you know, I talked about the patterns that we have. And we had a process of trying to get people to think about and articulate who they wanted to become relative to their own growth. So I would say, and this was a really hard thing for me, as a leader, I need to listen more and talk less. You know, the room doesn't always need to be filled with my ideas and my solutions. So I had to make that an aim of myself. I did that publicly. And we would stop during the course of meetings to have people reflect on, were they really being who they committed to become? And so that process of growth was woven right into the very fabric of the business. I think one of the most important things that I have stayed focused on is remembering how little I know. You know, I know so little of what there is to know. There's no way I can have the right answer. I mean, because I have so little of what there is to know in the universe. And it's humbling because it keeps you reminded that anybody can show up anytime from any place with a better idea than the idea that you have. We had a wonderful consultant, Carol Sanford, who worked with us for many years, and you know, she said, you have to grow people to grow a business. And American companies don't do that. I mean, they don't invest in the growth of the people. And you know, I think that one of the things that's important if you're running a business is to find people that not only are good at what they do, but are committed to that process of growth and development, or they get in the way of the evolution of the business. So there's a book that I wrote that you can only get on Amazon called in our every deliberation, seventh generation's journey towards corporate consciousness. No publisher would let you have that long a book, but because I published this book myself, I could have any title I wanted. And it talks in greater detail than anything else I've written about my own leadership journey and my own struggle to get out of my own way. And as my wife will tell you, it would have been all a lot simpler if I just listened to her more than I do. But you know, that's taken a long time to learn. My wife is right there. Another question, yes.
In the beginning, you asked us to name products we considered good. What are your thoughts on Tom's, the shoes and the other items they're making now?
Well, I can't tell you from an inside perspective of knowing the facts. I can say from a marketing perspective, one of the smartest positioning and marketing ideas that have come along in a long time. It's simple, you get it, you understand it. I don't know where the shoes are made. I don't think the shoes last very long. I don't think that, sorry? I mean, you just have to ask those questions. It doesn't strike me as a sustainable business model. That doesn't mean it can't become one, but you have to ask those questions. And again, what you should be doing is writing the company and saying, where are the shoes made? How long do they last? What happens when they wear out? You give out a lot of shoes, but what happens when all those kids' feet outgrow those shoes? Where do they end up? We have to ask those kind of questions. I mean, one of the most important things that you can learn in school and you can keep practicing is how to ask the right questions. I mean, one of the things that screws us up is if we ask the wrong questions, the answer doesn't matter. And we often don't know what questions to ask. And working on those questions, what are the most important questions to ask, are really critical. I would call on you, but I'm waiting for the microphone to get there.
Thank you. As an NYU Tom's representative, I will tell you that they do actually provide shoes over a period of time.
Say that again, I didn't hear you.
They do provide shoes over a period of time to the children as they grow, but I felt I had a responsibility to say that.
She wants to know what happens with the old ones when they outgrow them.
They do continually provide shoes for as they get older. I guess my question is, you talk about corporate subsidies needing to be abolished. With Citizens United saying that businesses are now a type of person that deserve political free speech, what role do you then see the government taking in moving towards a more socially responsible nation?
Yeah. I mean, we need to overturn Citizens United. It is a primary objective for the American Sustainable Business Council. And you know, you almost need an amendment to the Constitution to make that happen, which is not an easy thing to do. But I think it ranks as one of the most dangerous things to our future and the fabric of our society. And when you look at the history of the Supreme Court and you study the influence of business, we have had progressively more pro-business decisions by the Supreme Court over the last decade. That's not a good thing. And again, it's one of the examples of how business has, in some ways, I don't want to say infiltrated because no one was stopping them, but by focusing on the legal system, by focusing on the tax code, by focusing on accounting rules, by focusing on the legal system, they've designed this wonderful system that is very good for a very, 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 very small percentage of people. And we have to turn that around. Where's the microphone?
So you've talked a bit about taxes and a bit about corporate giving and corporate social responsibility. So a simple question, but not just for your corporation, not just for seventh generation, would you rather see corporations spend an extra 10% of their income on taxes or on their own ideas of philanthropic giving or initiatives or corporate social responsibility?
Yeah. Well, I don't think they should have a choice about their taxes. I think we should have a flat tax, and that shouldn't be something that companies get to decide on. You know, there's a huge variance in how charitable companies are. I mean, seventh generation gave away 10% of its profits. There's hundreds and hundreds of businesses that are members of 1% for the Planet, which give away 1% of their revenues, which usually is a lot more than 10% of their profits. And you know, I think charitable giving is a good thing, but it's less important than building those positive aspirations into the very way the business functions. And you know, we have a problem in this country where chemical companies that make chemicals that cause cancer give away money to cancer organizations when they should be spending that money on redesigning their chemicals so that they don't cause cancer. So again, I don't want to discourage charitable giving, but it's not a replacement for making the structural systemic changes in the business that mitigate the negative effect that the business is having. You can't make up for those things by giving money away.
Hello.
Hi.
I make videos for nonprofits, and so we always end our videos with a call to action. So I thought it'd be interesting to ask you, what is your call to action for this group today? If you could have everyone take one step either tonight or tomorrow, what would you want that to be moving forward?
I'll give you, that's a great question. Thank you for that. I'll give you two. I mean, all of you or most of you are at an interesting inflection point relative to your careers. And I think the question that you have to ask yourselves is, what is the positive effect that you're committed to have through the career path you choose? And I think it's valuable to be very intentional about that. To say that I'm going to be committed in my career to ending childhood hunger. I mean, I think that we need people to make big, audacious commitments to what effect they're going to have when they go out into the world. So that would be one. What are you going to do through your career to have a positive effect on the world? And the other is sort of the other side of the coin. You know, we walk through life taking out our wallets and spending money. And as all of you know, every time you do that, you're voting for a set of values. And I don't want to minimize the importance of that. What you buy, where you buy it, who you support. I mean, I'm trying to break my Amazon addiction and support my local bookseller. And it's really, really hard because I'm like really addicted to Amazon. But those are really important things to do because there is this huge disparity usually between the values we have and the things we like and the things we believe in our own behavior. And we sort of need to have our own personal come to Jesus meeting about how we're going to mitigate the gap between what we want, what we believe in, and how we behave. And again, I'm not above, you know, I need those come to Jesus meetings every day. Thank you for that question. That was a great question. I think we have time for maybe one last question.
Hi. You've been talking a lot about like the government involvement in our businesses and like the Supreme Court decisions that have arisen in the past decade that have been very detrimental to the sort of positive progression into what we need to think of as like the localized economies, things like that. I was wondering, what's your opinion on how much involvement the government needs to have in the eco-friendly side, how we need to sort of evolve ourselves into the good products that you keep talking about.
So, globally speaking, the only way any country has set sustainability standards for products is when it was done by the government. There is really no success anywhere else through any other way. And you know, I don't want to sound like the government is the solution to all our problems, because certainly today that's not the case. But I do think that there really is a role for the government in setting standards. Because the government hasn't been doing that, you know, we have to push other entities to do that. I mean, the whole reason that I spent a lot of time with Walmart is because Walmart could do what the government wasn't willing to do. If Walmart said, take this chemical out of the products that you sell us, you might as well have every government on the planet make that decision. And this is the interesting time we live in, because these big global companies can set standards, if they're willing to, that bring rapid change throughout the entire supply chain, throughout the entire world. And it is an amazingly powerful weapon for those of you that go into these big companies to realize the way in which they can influence the entire supply chain, the way products are made. But I am an advocate of having the government set those standards. So, thank you very much. I hope this has been helpful in some small way. So thanks for coming and listening.